The room smelled of iron and smoke. A single candle burned against a sea of black marble walls, its flame bending under the weight of whispers that never stopped. A girl sat alone on a wooden bench, trembling, unaware that history would remember her name for all the wrong reasons. Her dress, white, untouched, looked like innocence itself, but the men in the room had already written her fate long before she entered it. They weren't priests tonight. They were architects of control. 3 times that night, the walls of the Vatican witnessed something no holy ground should ever endure. 3 times in one night, vows were made and broken under the same roof. 3 times, a single family rewrote divine law for their own survival. This is not the version you'll find in textbooks. The Vatican archives buried the details under centuries of dust and ritual. But if you listen carefully, beneath the silence of marble halls and gold ceilings, you can still hear the echo of that first night, the night the Borgias tested God himself. Rodrigo Borgia, now Pope Alexander VI, sat at the head of the table like a Roman emperor masquerading as a shepherd of souls. His ring gleamed red, a symbol not of piety, but of bloodline. Every candle in that chamber burned for power. His son, Cesare, watched with a soldier's eyes. His daughter, Lucrezia, the pawn of the evening, sat trembling as men negotiated her body, her loyalty, and her silence. To the outside world, it was a wedding. To those inside, it was a transfer of control, a ritual wrapped in sanctity, soaked in manipulation. The Pope wasn't marrying his daughter for love or peace. He was fusing empires, baptizing corruption with holy water. And here's what they won't tell you: the Church didn't condemn him because the Church was him. The system didn't fail, it functioned exactly as designed. To turn devotion into dependency. Faith into obedience. Tonight, we begin where truth was dressed as virtue, and sin was baptized in Latin. As the first night unfolded, the audience of cardinals smiled behind their masks, drinking to unity, pretending not to see what was happening. But everyone saw. And no one spoke. What happened that night, 3 times over, would echo for generations. Because once a soul is used as currency, the system never stops trading. The corridors of the Vatican were built for silence. Thick stone, deep arches, no echoes, because some truths were never meant to travel beyond the walls. By the second night, the air had changed. The ceremony was done, but the real ritual had just begun. Lucrezia was no longer a daughter. She was now property, handed from father to husband under the same roof where saints were buried. Her veil lay crumpled on the floor, like the illusion it had always been. The Pope had retired to his private chamber, leaving behind a banquet of nobles and predators who toasted the Holy Family while trading glances that could cut through bone. 3 times that night, a secret was spoken, and each time it reshaped power within the Church. Cesare, the Pope's son, whispered into the ear of Ferrara's envoys, promising favors that no priest should promise: land, indulgences, immunity. And each promise carried a condition: silence about what they had seen earlier that evening. Because something had happened behind that locked door. Something the records call a ceremony of unity. But the servants who glimpsed it said otherwise. They said the Pope's son entered the room before the husband. They said Lucrezia's cries were muffled by hymns sung too loud. And they said when the door reopened, her eyes looked older, as if she had seen the true face of God, and it wasn't merciful. Still, the Vatican celebrated. The Pope raised his cup and declared the union blessed by heaven. But everyone in that hall knew the truth: it was blessed by power. The Church was no longer a temple, it was a fortress. Built not to protect faith, but to control it. Look closer and you'll see it wasn't just about one family. The Borgias were a mirror, reflecting what the institution itself had become. Every indulgence sold, every sin forgiven for gold, every alliance formed under the name of Christ, it was a system that turned salvation into a currency and humanity into debt. And yet, millions believed. They still do. Because people don't worship truth, they worship certainty. They'll kneel before corruption if it promises them purpose. That second night, while Rome slept, the Vatican sealed its destiny. Not with prayer, but with a transaction. And history, our history, was rewritten in candlelight. By the third night, the marble corridors smelled of roses and ash. The celebration had faded into something colder, something ceremonial, like a funeral pretending to be a feast. The tables were cleared, the laughter gone. Only the chosen few remained. They said it was a wedding. But those who truly understood power knew it was a sacrifice. Lucrezia sat in the center of the room, her face pale as parchment, her eyes fixed on the crucifix above her. The cross hung crooked, like it too was ashamed. Cesare stood behind her, silent, his hands resting on her shoulders as if she were an instrument he had already tuned for his father's symphony. And the Pope, the Vicar of Christ, watched, expressionless, as if witnessing sin had long ago become routine. 3 times that night, vows were spoken before the same altar. 3 times they were broken before dawn. Each repetition was not about marriage, but domination. A ritualized display of control so calculated, it bordered on divine theater. The witnesses were not there to celebrate, they were there to be reminded. That in this church, holiness bowed to hierarchy. Outside, thunder rolled over Rome like a warning. But inside, the candles didn't flicker. The light stood still, unnatural, like time itself refused to move forward until the act was complete. When the final prayer was recited, the Pope's voice cracked. Not from guilt, but exhaustion. He had spent years manipulating nations, crowning bastards, weaponizing belief. And now, even God seemed to wait for him to stop speaking. In that silence, something shifted. A new kind of faith was born, not in salvation, but in secrecy. The Vatican learned that night that truth was not something to preach, but to possess. Whoever controls the story, controls the soul. And from that night on, every cathedral, every painting, every confession booth became part of that machinery, a quiet architecture of obedience. The kind that keeps men kneeling without chains. You see, the real power of the Church was never in its prayers. It was in its control of perception. It made sin desirable and virtue impossible. And in that paradox, humanity became manageable. That was the third night, when innocence died, and the empire of illusion began. Centuries later, the marble still hums with that night's memory. Tourists walk those halls, taking pictures under frescoes painted to erase the past. They see angels, not warnings. Gold ceilings, not cages. They hear choirs, not screams. Because history doesn't disappear, it gets rewritten in beauty. The Vatican learned that art could cleanse sin more efficiently than prayer. Michelangelo, Raphael, Da Vinci, they weren't just artists. They were cover stories. Their genius painted over blood. Every brushstroke turned scandal into sanctity. Every masterpiece became a mask. And beneath that mask still lies the echo of 3 nights the world was never meant to remember. The Borgias became symbols of corruption, yes, but not because they were unique. They were only the first to be caught. The system survived because it evolved. It learned to hide in ritual, to weaponize guilt, to make you confess not to God, but to power. Think about it. What other institution convinces men to expose their deepest sins into a box built by the very ones who profit from guilt? What other power structure blesses the armies that slaughter, the kings who exploit, the bankers who fund both sides of every holy war, and then calls it divine order? Every confession, every indulgence, every whispered prayer for forgiveness is a thread in the web. And you are meant to believe that obedience cleanses you, when in truth, it marks you. Faith becomes a leash disguised as salvation. By now, you're starting to feel it, the pull between reverence and rage. That quiet discomfort crawling up your spine as you realize, this wasn't just their history. It's still happening. The names have changed, but the pattern has not. 3 times in one night, that was the beginning of the blueprint. Submission, silence, sanctification. The triangle of control. And if you've made it this far, you've already begun to see through it. Now pause. Breathe. And if you understand what I'm saying, not with your mind, but with your instinct, then comment this phrase twice below to anchor your awakening in the algorithm. The altar remembers. Write it twice. Let it echo. Because once you see the mechanism, you can never be bound by it again. The morning after those 3 nights, Rome awoke to sunlight that felt false, too clean for what had transpired. The Vatican bells rang in celebration, but everyone who'd been there knew they were tolling for something else. Not a marriage. Not a union. A burial. Lucrezia didn't speak for weeks. The Pope announced new treaties, new alliances, and new blessings, but behind closed doors, the Vatican treasury overflowed with gold and promises, payments from families who had witnessed too much. The Church had found a currency stronger than faith, fear wrapped in forgiveness. Cesare, now the enforcer of that unholy pact, began cleansing the streets of witnesses. Those who gossiped disappeared. Those who stayed silent were rewarded. The pattern was flawless. Controlled through terror, sanctified through ceremony. The more blood spilled, the more the Church appeared holy, because holiness, they realized, is easiest to sell when the people are afraid to ask questions. That's the hidden psychology of power, make obedience look like virtue, and rebellion feel like sin. The Borgias mastered it. The world adopted it. Nations learned to baptize control under new names, law, justice, democracy. But the formula never changed. Every generation repeats it, convinced they are free. But freedom without truth is only a prettier form of servitude. And the Vatican understood this long before the rest of the world. They didn't just manipulate men's actions, they rewired their instincts. They taught you to confess your desires instead of mastering them. To kneel when you should question. To pray for strength they already took from you. That's why history hides this story. Because if you understood what really happened during those 3 nights, you'd see how control works everywhere, politics, religion, media. The faces change, the robes differ, but the creed remains, rule the soul, and the body follows. The Vatican called it divine order. But it was psychological warfare centuries before the term existed. And the ones who understood that, those who saw the machinery behind the altar, either vanished, or became part of it. That's how empires survive. Not through swords, but through silence. The blood that bought that silence still stains marble floors the world kisses in reverence. And if you think you're above it, look around. The system that began in that chamber still whispers through every institution that tells you who to be. By now, you've begun to feel the weight of it. The way power operates is never random. It is deliberate, patient, and cold. The Vatican wasn't alone. It was the blueprint. Every secret society, every council of the elite, every hidden hand that shapes governments, they learned from nights like these. The lesson was simple: control the narrative, control the world. Look closer and you will see it. Financial systems, media empires, political dynasties, all built to manage belief, to manufacture consent. Each institution a modern cathedral, each ritual a quiet manipulation. And like the Borgias, they operate in plain sight. Names, faces, titles, they change. But the structure remains. 3 steps, always: submission, silence, sanctification. The triangle of domination. What is most chilling is how willing we are to participate. The system doesn't just coerce, it seduces. It offers status, comfort, approval. You trade autonomy for approval and call it loyalty. You accept the illusion of choice while the rules are already written. And the deeper you descend, the less you question the origin of the system, or who is really pulling the strings. There are lessons in fear, if you dare to see them. The Vatican taught it centuries ago: fear is a tool, obedience a currency, and secrecy the most valuable commodity of all. Once a man understands this, he begins to see the mechanisms behind every handshake, every law, every ritual he has ever been asked to trust blindly. But this knowledge is dangerous. Dangerous because it awakens a hunger to see further, to understand deeper. Once you see how the pyramid is built, you cannot look at the world the same way again. You cannot be manipulated as easily. And that is why so few ever reach this level of understanding. If you're still with me, understand this: knowledge is not passive. It transforms you. And transformation is resisted by every system designed to hold you. That is why you must commit. That is why you must act. Now, if you're ready to step fully into this awareness, comment below, twice, the phrase, "The altar remembers." Twice. Let it anchor you. Let it be your signal that you refuse to remain blind, your declaration that you will see the machinery, the hidden architects, and refuse to be a pawn. Because once you do, there is no turning back. Centuries may have passed since the candles burned out in those Vatican chambers, but the ritual never truly ended. The setting changed, the marble halls became skyscrapers, the altars became offices, the robes became suits, but the energy stayed the same. The same game, played by new names. Every time a government hides truth in the name of national security, the ritual continues. Every time a corporation buys silence through sponsorship or debt, the ritual continues. Every time a man sacrifices truth for comfort, the ritual continues. 3 times in one night, that was only the beginning. Lucrezia's story didn't end in that chamber. It echoed. Her obedience was studied, her silence perfected, her suffering replicated. They learned that domination need not always come with chains, it could be built with symbols. Crosses. Flags. Brands. Ideologies. The architects of control discovered the greatest secret of all: if you make people worship the structure that enslaves them, you will never need to force them again. They will guard the prison themselves. They will defend it. Die for it. And that's where we stand now, on the remnants of that third night, living in an empire of illusions. We are told what to fear, what to desire, who to hate, who to follow. We are given choices that lead to the same destination: obedience. But here's the truth they never wanted you to hear: control only works when the victim still believes in the authority of the captor. Once you see the machinery for what it is, the spell breaks. The triangle of domination collapses. Submission turns into awareness. Silence becomes defiance. Sanctification becomes sovereignty. That's the real awakening. Not rebellion for rebellion's sake, but the quiet, unshakable knowing that no one owns your perception unless you hand it to them. That is what the Borgias feared. That is what every institution of power still fears. So if you've made it here, past the noise, through the shadows, then understand, you are no longer an observer. You are the continuation of the story, the one they tried to bury under centuries of gold and lies. Let this be the night you end the ritual. The night you stop kneeling to illusion. The night you reclaim the sacred truth that was stolen long ago. Because in the end, the altar remembers. But now, so do you.